Hello everyone, I'm David Vaucher. This is Return on Racing. Return on Racing is powered by Vaucher Analytics, which helps race teams and drivers drive efficiencies off track so they can fuel success on track. So if you want to discuss your own motorsport organization's strategy or finances, you can get in touch with me at contact@vaucheranalytics.com. Return on Racing is also brought to you by the Motorsport Sponsorship Accelerator, the most cutting-edge resource out there to learn how to find, maintain, and grow long-term sponsorship relationships. If you're interested in finding out more, please visit the Vaucher Analytics website and use the navigation links at the top right hand of the screen. And the address for the website is www.vaucheranalytics.com. So today is the second of a two-part series on a case study that automakers can use with regards to facing the coming onslaught, or at least the coming arrival on the market of Chinese EVs. And that case study is that of the quartz crisis with luxury watches in Switzerland. Just to give a quick recap of the first episode, which will be linked in the show notes, essentially, Switzerland remade itself as a purveyor of luxury goods rather than utilitarian goods after the arrival of cheaper quartz technology from Asia in the 1970s. So prior to that point, all watches were mechanical, but they served a utilitarian purpose. After quartz arrived, which allowed for more precise watches than the mechanical alternatives, the watch world had to pivot, and Switzerland did by repositioning its watches not as utilitarian products, but as ones that were worthy of desire. I laid out the analogy for this with the automotive world in the first episode, and today I want to talk about the path forward, which is that legacy automakers must move up market and, just like the Swiss, sell emotion, not features. Value-based arguments matter, but none of them build emotional loyalty. Saying an EV is more hassle-free or a better value than an ICE car is like saying a quartz watch is more accurate than the mechanical one. It is true, but it steers consumers toward a mercenary mindset where the most objectively superior option always wins. And increasingly, that will be a tough case for established car brands to make if they want to meet Chinese EVs on their turf. However, they have something China does not. China does not have deep automotive heritage. It has a history, uncontestably, but not a heritage, not in the sense that Porsche, Ferrari, Toyota, BMW, Honda, Ford, Subaru, or Mercedes possess it. What China does have is scale, integration, aggressive industrial policy, and the ability to produce convenient, affordable, increasingly well-designed EVs at breakneck speed that basically defies comprehension. It is following the exact path Japan did with quartz, set the rules of the new game, then dominate on price, volume, and manufacturing efficiency. Meanwhile, today in the car world, Europe, the United States, and ironically to an extent Japan find themselves playing a game they did not design. A game they cannot win on China's terms, whose infrastructure is designed around new powertrain solutions. The resulting lower prices with regard to equivalent established brands are a problem because Europe, America, and Japan do not and will never win on price, but they can absolutely win on margin, as luxury brands do as compared to high street retailers. And they can do so alongside the EVs, which are so often seen as a threat to the established order. If the watch industry teaches us anything, it's that when a legacy player cannot win on scale or cost, the rational response is to leverage that legacy and attempt to move up market. Switzerland survived by abandoning the fight for mass market relevance, or even any pretensions of quantifiable value, and instead embracing the emotional, cultural, and symbolic value of its products. The same strategic path is now open, indeed increasingly necessary for established automakers. Their advantages are emotional and cultural: heritage, motorsport pedigree, craftsmanship, design language, national identity, and story. This is the contest legacy brands can win, and yet the industry continues to chase a narrative that pushes them into the exact trap quartz set for the Swiss. Let's take the regulatory landscape at face value for a moment. Assume that European automakers sincerely want to reduce emissions, from the sourcing of materials to production to usage to end of life, disposal, and perhaps recovery. I'll get to those later on. The current regulatory approach attempts to achieve this by prescribing a particularly drivetrain mix. But what if it just mandated a target? This raises a strategic question. What if, in the long term, legacy automakers simply ceded the mass market entirely to China? What if, instead of diluting themselves across a broad, value sensitive product portfolio, legacy automakers concentrated on what they do best and have done since their inception: selling emotion at a premium? Imagine a scenario where legacy automotive brands anchor their portfolios on exquisitely engineered combustion engines, limited run specials, beautifully noisy powertrains, bespoke interiors, personalization programs, and very profitable options packages, while Chinese manufacturers own the popular mass market EV mobility space, or if we want to be a little blunt about it, EVs as transportation appliances on a certain spectrum of comfort. Under this model, Chinese automakers specialize in delivering the best, most efficient, most accessible transportation available, while others, like the Swiss, shrink to grow, concentrating on luxury, culture, and emotional value and connection. The result, in theory, is as follows: a smaller but more profitable footprint, and ironically, a reduced environmental burden from lower production, lower emissions because fewer people are driving internal combustion engine cars, and lower disposable emissions because people maintain and keep those cars. In many ways, we are already seeing this evolution begin, and some of this is actually built into the car market currently. Consider that the average price of a car in the US is now $50,000. So until a cheaper alternative appears, on average, everyone who wants a new car is a de facto luxury buyer, because on what planet is $50,000 not a huge amount of money? At the truly high end of the market, Ferrari also makes substantial profits selling options packages on top of its already high prices, and these are earned from decades of brand management. In fact, Ferrari's only marketing spend is its motorsport program, and this has been cultivated basically since the start of the brand, and it's baked into the DNA. That is hard earned. At an industry level, just as mechanical watchmaking sparked a renaissance of artisanal independence, such as F.P. Journe, Philippe Dufour, de Bethune, the automotive world is undergoing the same fragmentation, or you could say diversification. Pagani, Koenigsegg, Rimac, Singer, GMA, and a host of restoration houses have emerged because enthusiasts crave mechanical artistry that can last. They want objects with personality and permanence, not just transportation appliances. And the more mainstream brands drift towards anonymous electric mobility, the more powerful the counter movement toward mechanical purity becomes. I've been talking in terms of racing, but the off-road segment illustrates this dynamic clearly. Stellantis has already leveraged Jeep's heritage to push it upmarket, increasing prices faster than perceived quality improvements. And this is a dangerous position. Off-road capability is one of the few emotional moats that Western brands own, and it should be fortified, not eroded. Because if a Chinese manufacturer eventually produces an electric off-roader that is better built, more reliable, and significantly cheaper, and that's a scenario that is not far-fetched and may even be here, judging by some of the reviews I've seen, many consumers will choose value over heritage. At that point, Jeep's only defensible lever will be its identity, and identity is meaningful only if the underlying product remains worthy of it. For established automakers, following this path is not without cost. Transitioning away from mass market ICE or mass market EV portfolios would represent a profound restructuring of century-old business models and a hard pivot from one that was made just recently as well. But the alternative, attempting to remake themselves into battery appliance manufacturers at worst and run-of-the-mill car companies selling EVs at best, in a market where China sets the terms, is arguably far more expensive and consequential in the long term, with far lower odds of success. To bring this even further towards the Swiss watch analogy, I want to put forth an idea that legacy car makers need their own version of the Swiss-made label. The Swiss-made label is of high value for several reasons. On one hand, decades of associating Swiss manufacturing with quality allow the country to export goods with a high perceived value, and that's everything. That's chocolate, that's Swiss Army knives, that's watches, among so many other things. On the other hand, one of the least understood aspects of Swiss horology is that Swiss made rests on the percentage of value allocated to a watch's production, and we can generally qualify that allocation process as loose. In practice, this allows considerable flexibility in sourcing. A watch can contain many globally sourced components and still qualify to bear the Swiss-made label. The value, though, lies not solely in rigid adherence to a term, but also in the perception of cultural authenticity. And this works in a virtuous loop up and down the cost spectrum. The Swiss made label helps to justify the purchase of watches costing tens of thousands, even hundreds of thousands of dollars. And the halo effect of those watches convinces the recent college grad to splurge $1,000, which is still very much a premium choice when one can view the time on their phone, on a watch that also says Swiss made, even while it is far less so than the options costing as much as a house or indeed a car. Regardless of the powertrain, the size of China alone as a new competitor means that European, Japanese, South Korean, and American automakers will have to scrap for every differentiation factor they have available to them. They can therefore apply the same logic as the Swiss: celebrate and codify domestic craftsmanship, story, and engineering identity, while leveraging global supply chains to sell premium cars for the mid-career professional all the way up to the CEO. Now, I need to mention something else. This is really important because it would come up in any eventual counter argument to what I'm putting forth. So, going up market poses a risk to jobs, but I want to say that there is an upside here. In any conversation about efficiency, and certainly one in which the hypothesis to completely abandon a long tail of vehicles produced by existing car companies will inevitably bring up concerns about job losses. These concerns are real, but they have to be confronted honestly. Chinese factories run on robotics and automation at a scale which is almost unfathomable. Is this what existing car manufacturers want to get to, assuming their workforces and governments even let them try? If so, then the job losses are already foretold. It's just a matter of time. Can they even fight this war on two fronts, in which they, being legacy automakers, must tool up for this new paradigm while also keeping their existing operations solvent? While this is a vast question to contemplate, Europe's cost structure is not set up to compete on a price. And by the way, neither is America's. That's just what happens when you have one paradigm and you're moving into another for which a new entrant to the market is better prepared. In a paradigm where consumers will migrate toward value, the mass market favors China's cost structure. Furthermore, for these employees who are left servicing a smaller yet potentially more lucrative automotive market, the future could be much brighter. If you visit a Swiss watch workshop today, you'll see well-trained, highly educated watchmakers operating state-of-the-art machinery. And if this is by analogy the future that established automakers can offer their workforces, then it appears to me to be one worth aiming for. Now I want to get back to sustainability. In the first part of this series, I wanted to put to bed the misconception that EVs are sustainable and ICE is not. And I want to delve into that even further here. Though I've tried to avoid dwelling on sustainability, there's an interesting historical irony potentially at play for legacy automakers. EVs are marketed as sustainable alternatives, but in truth, if EVs do become widespread and have appliance-like life cycles like that of your phone, what are we to make of all the e-waste that future generations will have to contend with? Meanwhile, consider that Swiss watches survive and are cherished because they are worth repairing. Servicing a mechanical watch costs a small fortune, but people pay those sums because preserving something of emotional value feels meaningful. Quartz watches, by contrast, are inherently cheap and are very likely to be discarded should they no longer work or be wanted. Lost in the automotive discussion over sustainability is that repair culture is sustainability, perhaps the most honest form of it. Today, a trip to the garage is for many a necessary burden of car ownership, often costing large sums of money and causing considerable stress because it's not something that really can be planned for. In a hypothetical paradigm in which legacy automakers have moved upmarket, servicing can be even more of a margin driver than it is today, because the more luxurious the machinery, the higher the servicing costs. Automakers could even come up with a marketing campaign to convince ICE purists that servicing is actually part of the joy of ownership. The joy, not the necessity, that's key. As well as craft individualized experiences out of each trip to the service facility, all to reinforce the fact that they can offer what Chinese EV brands do not: something close to immortality via their machines. I want to talk now about hybrids because they haven't been mentioned, but they're also key to this analogy between the automotive industry currently and the Swiss watch industry during and after the quartz crisis. My view is that hybrids serve as the strategic moat for legacy automakers. To me, these are a crucial medium-term strategic advantage. Now, I'm not personally convinced, and I could be wrong about this, but I'm not personally convinced that hybrids are the future of the car industry if we project ourselves decades or even a century into the future. As battery technology and charging networks evolve and early adopters convince more and more people to buy full EVs, who will be left wanting the added expense and complexity of an ICE vehicle they don't really feel much about? Nevertheless, hybrids are a crucial strategic differentiator, and more importantly, something China is not yet widely known for, even while the country absolutely does buy and sell them in large numbers. The perception alone that China makes EVs and not necessarily hybrids is valuable. Legacy automakers still possess vastly deeper hybrid know-how, rooted in motorsport, long-term R&D, and an engineering culture that goes back to the dawn of the automobile. That advantage will not last forever, but it exists today, and it is one of the few domains in which Western and established Asian automakers can still go toe-to-toe with China on substance rather than nostalgia. It was Toyota, after all, that posted its stake in the ground very early with the Prius. In that respect, hybrids perform a very important function. To go back to the watch analogy, they buy time. They stabilize what I guess you could refer to as the middle of the market, while the bottom shifts to lower cost Chinese EVs and the top moves towards emotional, high margin ICE. And critically, hybrids keep ICE technology alive. The engineering talent, the supply chain, the tuning know how, so it doesn't disappear the way much of Switzerland's mechanical manufacturing infrastructure did when traditional watchmaking machines were literally scrapped during the quartz crisis. And that is actually what happened. Everyone thought that quartz was here, mechanical watches were done, and the machinery to make these mechanical components were just straight up destroyed. I do not believe hybrids are the end game 100 years from now. Or I should say, that is my hypothesis. To me, they're the Swatch Watch phase of the quartz crisis, the practical, contemporary solution that keeps legacy automotive brands top of mind, while new competitors, such as BYD, among others, of course, come into the market long enough for legacy automakers to execute their real pivot. My hypothesis is not that hybrids are where established brands win against China. Rather, they're what keep legacy brands alive long enough to win elsewhere. Now, nothing of what I say is meant to be absolute. It is, of course, not the case that I'm saying that legacy automakers should only make luxury ICE and forget about EVs. That is not the case. But there's a caveat here. If automakers want EVs in their portfolio, they need premium EVs made irresistible by the emotions created by motorsport. Vaucher Analytics is a consulting practice focused on motorsport, and participation in these activities on an ongoing basis will become an even more essential marketing expense. Going back to the example of Ferrari, that is their only marketing expense. And this is not only to keep up a premium image, but also to face the reality that Chinese teams will inevitably head for the track to build their own legends, just as Japanese brands did in the latter part of the 20th century. South Korea's Hyundai is far down this path, so if a European, Japanese, or American brand really wants to stay in the mass market EV segment, showing up to the racetrack will be even more important, provided the right halo messaging is built to go along with those campaigns. EVs, just like crossovers before them, will become interchangeable, so they must inherit meaning from their respective manufacturers' racing cars. This is exactly what Porsche and BMW did with the original Cayenne and the X5, respectively. And I think we can say that in the market, those two now look like very distinctive vehicles because they use the design DNA of their parent companies. And of course, that is all infused with the racing heritage that they have earned over decades. ICE motorsport has the potential to legitimize premium EVs and hybrids in a way that Chinese brands just can't at the moment. If you don't believe me, go watch a WEC race or an IMSA race, where most of the cars are hybrids, and tell me they don't look amazing. And the cars that aren't hybrid, well, there's one. It's the Aston Martin Valkyrie, propelled by a screaming, naturally aspirated V12 engine, and tell me you didn't peruse their website after seeing it chew up a straight. Today, it's worth highlighting Alpine, whose planned all-electric portfolio rests on its racing heritage, and Genesis Magma, which seems to be setting up a racing program as much to sell cars, which includes electric options, to consumers as it is to win races. If a brand such as BMW, Porsche, or Honda, among so many others, can create on-track monsters and then somehow convince customers that some of that magic shows up in their EV that they take no further than their workplace or the grocery store, then they may be able to make a sale. However, just how much of a premium this can command and the size of the audience for which this would be appealing would require further study. In fact, some very high-end Swiss brands do sell quartz models today at very high prices, but the clientele is, to me, very focused. In this context of motorsport, I just want to mention why recent automaker moves appear strategically incoherent. Swiss luxury brands do not compete in timing competitions with quartz watches. They don't need to because their value lies elsewhere. Likewise, Porsche, Ferrari, BMW, and Mercedes should not dilute their identity by competing in technological arenas that do not reinforce their emotional capital. In this framework, Porsche aggressively pushing EVs while leaving the WEC to focus further on Formula E is, to me, puzzling. I've written about this before. I'll link to my thoughts in the show notes. But regardless, it wouldn't be surprising if other enthusiast car brands, faced with similar short-term pressures, make the same kinds of decisions. I'll admit, these are extremely difficult paths to take, and they are not inherently wrong. But to me, they reveal an industry reacting defensively rather than strategically. So, to me, the future of Europe's car industry depends on a lesson that Switzerland already learned. In the absence of data, it's always dangerous to speak in absolutes rather than hypotheses, and I always want to couch my statements under the guise of hypotheses unless I have data to present. However, given the scale of the challenges facing Europe's, Japan's, and America's respective auto industries, these are close to absolute statements as one can get. If these regions attempt to outproduce China in EVs, they will fail. If they attempt to undercut China in price, they will fail. But if they embrace what makes their car cultures unique, emotion, heritage, longevity, motorsport lineage, craftsmanship, there is a path forward. The Swiss proved that path. Quartz was the neat new thing, but in the end, the old way came to be viewed as the more valuable, everlasting one, not the outdated one. Automobiles are undergoing the same transition. The brands that recognize this will survive, and the rest will become e-waste. Well, that is it from me in this two-part series. If you enjoyed it and you want more insights similar to the ones you just heard, please consider signing up for the Return on Racing newsletter. This is a newsletter that's delivered periodically directly to your inbox in a short format. The idea being that I provide you with actionable insights that you can apply immediately to your own motorsport organizations. If this sounds like something you'd be interested in, please visit the Vaucher Analytics website at www.vaucheranalytics.com. The sign-up box is right on the front page, and I'll also link to this in the show notes. I want to close this out, as usual, by thanking you so much for choosing to spend your time with me here on Return on Racing. I always really appreciate it, and I very much look forward to speaking with you on the next episode of Return on Racing.